This is Simon's story. Here he tells us about the time that he spent with Alabaré, how he came to be a resident at Alabaré Place, our home for homeless adults, and how his life has changed since. This is the voice of an actor reading Simon's own words.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I consider this to be a privilege. I'm 54 years old, and a long time ago I was a university teacher. I then fell into a bottle of wine for about 30 years, and as you can imagine, things went downhill from there. In the second half of 2015, I had to say goodbye to my little boy, who was driven 100 miles away from me, and I became street homeless. And the saddest part of that is my addiction was so deeply embedded in me that as he's been driven away from me by a social worker to go and live with my mother, I felt relieved because it meant I could go back to the pub. That's how spiritually impoverished I'd become. From 2015 to 2017 was the period I formed a relationship with Alabaré, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, but the worst thing that could have happened to him. So in some ways, I'm grateful for all that, whilst at the same time being deeply ashamed of it. In August 2017, my son came back to live with me, and that wouldn't have been possible without the support of you guys, so thank you. Initially, I was street homeless, sleeping on benches around Warminster. That November was particularly cold, and I was taken in by a hostel and bath for a few weeks. Then I found a move-on flat in Melksham, and I was supposed to be bidding on homes for Wiltshire, but I was still drinking, and they eventually booted me out. Alabaré had given me an interview, and they said I could come and stay on the no second night out scheme. Then they found me a place in Alabaré Place. After about 6 weeks, they moved me into one of the move-on flats. I think I was lucky. You asked how I found Alabaré. Well, I think that Alabaré found me in a way, and it provided a safe space in which to get well again. And that's the main thing, like I say, Alabaré did for me. And I did meet some wonderful people, not just staff and volunteers who I can't speak highly enough of, but I also made some friendships with others who were using the facilities, some of which I still maintain. So several things happened to me at the same time. I was lucky. I found Alabaré, or Alabaré found me. I started to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I accessed Turning Point. My son stayed within the family. I found God again. I was lucky that people tolerated me. My early days at Alabaré were basically all about recovery, but as recovery became embedded, I developed a life outside of that. And that's, it's a good life now. I do some freelance writing. My son's back with me and thriving. And my main thought now when I wake up in the morning is, well, it's never drink, it's normally God and gratitude. And I don't think I'd have to come back to God if it hadn't been I don't think I'd have come back to God if it hadn't been for Alabaré either. And so I'm just so grateful for everything that you did for me. I was with Alabaré for around 18 months. First of all, as I say, it was a safe space. I don't remember a single time when a volunteer or a staff member spoke out of turn to a single client, which I was grateful for. Obviously, there's a very strong Christian ethos within Alabaré. Not that it's forced on you, but that's just the kind of culture of the organisation. And the first thing you see when you walk into Alabaré Place, as you probably know, is a quotation from John's Gospel. Then I think kindness. I think there's a culture of kindness in Alabaré Place and Alabaré generally, which is not to say that everything's tolerated, but I didn't see anyone, even people who had to be asked to leave, I didn't see them being treated with anything other than respect. I stopped drinking 2 or 3 days before I moved into Alabaré Place. I hit rock bottom the day my son was driven away from me, but I stayed at rock bottom and then started to recover very gradually. Never give up, and if you need to be in recovery, don't think you can do it by yourself and you're going to have to work hard. There's always hope. It can be difficult. I don't know what I would have done if it hadn't been for this charity. I could have been dead. Also, always be prepared to ask for help. And whilst you can regret the situation you're in and rue the choices you've made, never think of yourself as worthless, because there's a lot of people out there that think of homeless people as worthless. I've seen people step across homeless people to walk into church because there's a culture of selfishness out there and an intolerance and unwillingness to see Christ in other people. There's also an interesting culture around being homeless, especially street homeless. It has its own language, its own protocols. So I look back, not with fondness, but not all the memories are bad. In my case, it was my fault. Yeah, it's important to say that if you're an alcoholic, you're ill, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't take responsibility. A responsibility for your recovery as well. But there's a lot of people I knew, especially in this county, ex-service people who were homeless through absolutely no fault of their own. Soldiers come back and are discharged. The system spits them out. People who just have some bad luck. Unemployment, mental illness, all sorts of reasons. One of the things I like about the Big Issue project is that when you buy a copy of the Big Issue from someone who's in the homelessness system, it's not just the money you're giving them, it's the fact that for 30 seconds you're inhabiting the same moral space, you're involved in a transaction, and I think there's a spiritual dimension to that. Can I tell you a story? 2 or 3 Christmases ago, a friend of mine gave my then 8-year-old £5. This was about a week before Christmas. I told him to buy himself something for Christmas. We were walking down the street and there was someone who was begging, street homeless. My son said to me, I'm going to give that homeless person the £5, Dad. Initially I was going to say, well, don't do that. Then I thought, what are you thinking? Why are all of you people trying to interfere with the charitable impulse of an 8-year-old boy? So he gave this guy his £5. About a week later we were walking past a hotel and the same guy came running up. I'd been chatting to him anyway, off and on. He said, Simon, hang on a second. He came up and pulled out £5 and gave it to my son and said, Happy Christmas. So that taught the kind of law of spiritual physics, that when you give, you get more. There are plenty of things that could have made it worse, but didn't happen, because that's not in the cultural values of Alabaré. I'm so grateful to everything that you did for me. And as for my little boy, you gave him his father back.